And welcome to the 2024 Ballot Forum. In less than 2 weeks, Americans will cast their votes in what may be the most consequential election since 1860. The 10 California propositions are a sideshow compared to the big event, but that's not to say they aren't important. Propositions which become laws can have significant effects on our lives. I think a lot of people find the propositions to be complicated and confusing. The Secretary of State, to help us, sends us this 142-page pamphlet full of legalese and arguments pro and con that really aren't very helpful. So what are people to do? I think some people just leave the propositions blank. I think a lot of people look at this, see the little blurb, and make their decision just based on that. And that's not really a very responsible way to vote, because the proposition might be very different in actuality than what this tells you. But we here at Willow Avenue Mennonite Church recognized long ago that there's a need in the community for a neutral forum where the propositions can be explained to give people a better understanding of what it is they're voting for. That's why, for the past 42 years, we've been presenting this program, which we call the Ballot Forum. First, I'm going to explain our format, and then I'm going to introduce the participants. It's been our custom to present this program as a panel discussion. There's a moderator, that's me, and my role is to briefly explain the propositions to you. Now, some of these are rather complex. They have a lot of details. It would not serve our purposes well for me to go into all those details. I'll do my best to summarize what the proposition is about so you'll understand that. After my introduction, then the two panelists will then present arguments pro and con on these propositions. I will tell you that tonight we're going to mix it up a little bit more than we're used to. In past years, you've been to this forum and we tend to agree on a lot of these. That's not going to happen tonight. We all agree, the three of us, on one of the propositions. That's Prop 33. You will hear a yes and a no argument from the panelists on all the other 9. There are 3 types of measures on our 2024 ballot. There are bond issues, legislative constitutional amendments, and initiatives. Now, you've probably noticed that the propositions have either single digits or double digits. The single digit ones, the first 5, were put on the ballot by the legislature. They include 2 bond measures and 3 legislative constitutional amendments. A bond measure is when the legislature places a measure on the ballot that is designed to raise money, and the voters can say yes or no to that. If they say yes, the state sells bonds to investors, and then the state pays back those investors over a period of 30, 35, maybe 40 years. The other kind of legislatively referred measure is the constitutional amendment. And the state constitution can be amended by a 2/3 vote of both the Assembly and the Senate. That's kind of hard to get. So the other way of doing it is put the measure on the ballot and have the people decide. We have 3 of those measures on our ballot tonight. The other 5 measures are initiatives. Now, initiatives get on the ballot by the circulation of a petition to get several 100,000 signatures that must be checked by the local registrar to make sure they're good. And if it meets that threshold, then the initiative goes on the ballot and the people vote yes or no. It's important to point out that these initiatives are not drafted by the legislative analysts. They're drafted by private individuals, usually lawyers. And the problem with the initiatives is they tend to be tricky and sometimes deceptive. If all you read on Proposition 19 a few years ago was just the blurb. You probably thought it sounded like a great thing. Well, in my practice, I have to deal with Prop 19 every week. It's not a great thing. So you need to read the initiative, find out what's really going on, or listen to this program tonight. All right, now I would like to introduce the persons who will be presenting the arguments tonight. First, Alan Peters. Alan, you can come up. Alan is former Assistant Director and Director of Fresno County Social Services. Alan has given testimony numerous times before the Human Services and Agriculture Committees of the California Assembly and Senate. He's a life member of the California Welfare Directors Association and has been an officer of their legislative committee. Alan has even gone to Washington to lobby for measures pending before Congress. We are blessed once again to have Alan serving on the Ballot Forum panel. Joshua Mitchell is our other panelist. Joshua was elected mayor of Sanger 3 times. He is a former chair of the California Latino Mayors Association, vice chair of Fresno County Economic Opportunity Commission. He's been a board member of California League of Cities. Those of you who drive to Reedley would be interested to know that when he was on the Measure C board, Joshua was the person who was most responsible for getting Freeway 180 extended out towards Reedley, cutting down our driving time by what, 7 minutes to Reedley? So we have him.
You're welcome.
For that. All right, I think our panelists may have a couple of introductory words, so I'll let them speak. Alan?
Did you mention the time limits?
Yes. And another thing, the folks in the back have pens if anybody needs them, so they're back there. And we have a timer here that the panelists will be watching. We're going to try to finish on time tonight. This will help us. Okay, Alan.
I asked Jeff if I could say a few words before we begin because I didn't want to keep repeating myself all night. I want you all to know that I do have some biases, and they will become clear tonight. And that isn't to say that I'm necessarily correct in them, but my background and my work in poverty organizations has always given me sort of a tenderness for the poor. And so if it comes to where in a proposition, I look at the language, I say, how will this affect the poor? And that will probably be one of the things that I mentioned to you. This could mean things like housing, health, or whatever. I have that bias toward it, leaning toward what would help the poor. Conversely, I don't have much worry about the wealthy in this country. I think the wealthy have proven that they have the resources and the skill to take good care of themselves, which the poor not necessarily have. So that when it comes to will this affect the wealthier segment of society, I don't worry about that as much as I do about the poor. I know from personal experience because I'm part of the wealthy. I consider myself part of the wealthy. And so I know full well that I can afford to pay more taxes. And I'm willing to do that if the use of that money is proper and good. I believe it's the legislative body's efforts then to figure out how to secure the funds that are necessary for that. But when I hear a proposition or a candidate attacked for being someone who will raise taxes, that doesn't worry me nearly as much as I worry about what will be done for the poor, how can we encourage the wealthy to participate in that process. So I just wanted to say those are the biases that might come through in my comments tonight.
I don't have as many biases, but I do have a tremendous amount of respect for Alan, and as I've gotten to know a little bit better his career, as I've become a little bit more involved in social services with Fresno County. So there's a lot that I had to gain tonight from Mr. Allen. But one thing I want to make crystal clear is we wanted to make sure that anyone that's truly on the fence with something, or someone who doesn't understand the ballot initiatives as well as they maybe should have, and that's all of us are guilty of not knowing enough going into this, that maybe we can bring a little bit more insight to this evening. But aside from that, I just want to make sure that I let you guys know how grateful I am for the opportunity to be here amongst you in your church this evening. It's an absolute pleasure and absolutely an honor to be amongst you. So thank you.
In past years, we have taken questions from the floor. We are interested in your questions, but in the interest of finishing the program on time, we will not do that. During the program, at the end, we could take questions then. We'll start with Proposition 2. I will tell you that Alan and I are yes votes on Prop 2. Joshua is a no vote. This is a bond issue. There are close to 6 million students in California's public schools. There are about 10,000 public schools and 115 community colleges. The schools are governed by local school districts. The colleges are governed by local community college districts. Now, the money to pay the supplies, pay the salaries, and so forth comes through your property taxes and some state funding. But when new facilities are built, that's different. The state pays 50% of the cost of new school facilities. The local school district pays the other 50%, and they raise the money for that through school bonds. When renovations are needed, the state pays 60%, the local community 40%. So this is a measure to raise the money to help fund the state's portion of the fund that pays for new school facilities. Now, the last time Californians approved a statewide school bond was in 2016. There was one on our ballot, which we discussed at the Ballot Forum in 2020. The voters rejected it. That fund into which these monies go will be empty by next February. So if this measure is not approved, there will be a problem, and there is a wide backlog of modernization and construction requests for new schools. A yes vote will authorize the issuance of $10 billion in general obligation bonds for the repair, upgrade, and construction of facilities in K-12, including charter schools, community colleges, and career technical education programs. Alan, you are a yes vote on Prop 2. What are your reasons?
There certainly is a need. We've seen pictures in the paper. We had a ballot proposition last local election time with schools wanting to have some money to help them improve and repair and build new facilities. California at this point has about 60, this is the state government, has approximately $61 billion in outstanding bond debt, with another $40 billion that has been authorized but never purchased or sold. So that makes about $100 billion that the state owes in bond issues like this. Most of us consider that similar to our mortgages. When we need to spend an awful lot of money on a house, or many of us on a car, we don't want to do that out of a lump sum payment out of this year's budget because it would be an overweighted kind of expenditure. So we spread it out. We borrow money from a bank or a credit union, and we pay over time. And that's what a bond measure does. So we have $100 billion. The part that I didn't mention is that each year, last year, for example, we paid back and we finished paying off $3.9 billion worth of bonds. So let's say $4 billion compared to 100. That's 1/25. A lot of us get a mortgage that goes for a lot longer than 25 years. So I know there's a need for school buildings. The facilities need to be repaired and built. And I consider that a suitable place where we can borrow money and assist these schools to get the facilities that they need.
Thank you. Well, a little bit of my thinking with this came about with regards to what we're going through right now with interest rates. Any bond measure, much like your car loan or your home loan, is susceptible to an interest rate that will ultimately guarantee those that are willing to invest in those bonds money back on their dollar invested. Right now, we're at some of the highest interest rates for public entities such as state and local governments that we've ever faced, if I'm not mistaken, in the last 30 years. Now, right now, as Prop 2 proposes to do, this would max out the state's credit card, and it would borrow $10 billion at incredibly high interest rates. And this is at a time when school enrollment in California is rapidly declining. And local politicians are discriminating against charter schools by prohibiting them from using public facilities. So if we think about those private schools that maybe kids attend or neighbors of yours attend, this specific proposition would make it impossible for those schools to take advantage of these public funds that they're paying into with their property taxes. Now, the other problem I have is that with regards to the studies. So there were no studies that truly identified with legitimacy the amount of schools that would be required, or the amount of classrooms, as they put it, that would be required over the next 10, 15, or 25 years. So as these bond measures pass and local school districts attempt to borrow from them, the problem is that we have no clue exactly what they would in fact need. And so how can we borrow against that? Some other concerns that I have is that this money is not just for new schools, because that's something I think all of us believe in. I come from Sanger, where Sanger, Apaches, from those that are familiar with Sanger, that's something we've all known for the past 75 years. There are now 2 high schools, so this definitely dipped into this type of a fund. But the other problem is that this money, it can also be used and be diverted for just simple local district budgets. So if a district doesn't do a good job budgeting their funds, this type of money can still be used to backfill where they budgeted incorrectly, not just for classrooms, pencils, teachers, and what have you. It also contains a mandatory project labor agreement provision, and this guts fair and open competition on construction contracts. So in the world of public works, you have to get a minimum of 3 bids. They have to be held hostage, if you will, to the Davis-Bacon Act, which is prevailing wage, which is perfectly fine. But this prevents, this can completely bypass it through the lease-back agreements, where basically someone who's rich, who owns a private construction company, can come in, buy the property, build the property out, and then get paid back. So it takes out that competition as well. And so those were a couple of the things that really bothered me with regards to this proposition, why I ultimately choose to vote no.
That ends our discussion of Prop 2. We will now move to Proposition 3. It just occurred to me that I didn't introduce myself, and this is an appropriate moment to do that. My name's Jeff Wall. I've been a lawyer in private practice for 51 years in Fresno. During that time, I've had some experience in constitutional law. I've filed appeals to the state Supreme Court and even the U.S. Supreme Court. I've had experience in getting measures to the ballot, so that's my background for this. Since 1948, there have been a whole list of decisions handed down by the United States Supreme Court based upon the equal protection and due process clauses of the 14th Amendment. And all of these decisions, up until 2 years ago, were to expand individual rights. Some notable decisions were Loving versus Virginia in 1967. Prior to 1967, there were many states that prohibited people of different races from getting married. This particular case originated in Virginia. The couple, their name was Loving, isn't that interesting? The Lovings married in Washington, D.C., then moved where it was legal, then moved to Virginia, where it was not. They were arrested in the middle of the night, charged with the crime of miscegenation, and while their sentence was pending, this conviction was appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which handed down this decision that says the 14th Amendment guaranteed their right to be married. You've all heard of Roe versus Wade. There was much controversy prior to 1973 about abortion when the Supreme Court finally ruled that the 14th Amendment guaranteed a woman the right to have an abortion. And that was the law for 50 years. In 2008, you may recall, and we discussed it at this ballot forum, Proposition 8 was on our ballot. Prop 8 was to put a provision in the California Constitution which said marriage is between a man and a woman. And that was the law for several years. But in 2015, a group of cases went to the Supreme Court of the United States. One of them was taken up from California, from Proposition 8, when the Supreme Court at that time, not the current Supreme Court, but at that time ruled that the 14th Amendment, due process, and equal protection clauses guaranteed the right of an individual to marry another person of the same sex. That threw out Proposition 8. But 2 years ago, in Dobbs versus Jackson, the new Supreme Court overruled the Roe decision. Now, I've read the opinions. The opinion of the majority of the court focuses upon just overruling Roe versus Wade. But if you read the language of the opinion, you see what they base their ruling on is the concept that the 14th Amendment shouldn't be used to guarantee individual rights. In fact, one of the concurring opinions, that of Justice Clarence Thomas, said all those 14th Amendment opinions are wrong, including, and he specifically named Obergefell. He said, we need to revisit these and throw them out. Well, we don't know what the future holds. And many court watchers believe that Dobbs is not the first time this is going to come up. In fact, we could be seeing an overruling of Obergefell in the future. Now, if that were to happen, then California, along with some 30 other states that have constitutional provisions stating marriage is between a man and a woman, would then become law again. It would then be in the California Constitution that two people of the same sex can't marry. So, now we're talking about Proposition 3. What is the purpose of this proposition? This is a legislative constitutional amendment. It's been referred to the ballot by the California legislature. If this passes, this will place a provision in our state's constitution recognizing the right to marry regardless of sex or race, so that if the federal Supreme Court throws out that line of 14th Amendment cases, at least in California, those rights will still exist. All three of us on this panel are voting yes on Proposition 3. Do either of you wish to add anything to the comments I've just made?
Yeah, I would. I would just like to say, in my lifetime at least, I always thought it was something for Republicans to use each election cycle and Democrats to fight every election cycle, which was Roe versus Wade. And then as quickly as I imagine it was possible, we saw Roe versus Wade thrown out. And what happened was, by default, it got thrown back to the states. And as Mr. Wald pointed out, without this in place, it's impossible to guarantee, especially with the Supreme Court set up the way it is currently, for two adults, consenting adults rather said, to be able to protect their union of marriage. It would be impossible because ultimately the state wouldn't have a law in place to protect that. And if we had to have a law in place and didn't pass this, it would go back to Proposition 8, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Mr. Wall? Yeah, so you have to have this in place to update it. I am a little bit scared, though, and this is where it gets a little scary. There's still no definition of marriage in this measure, or in this proposition, rather said. So I think what we're going to see come down the pipe here soon will probably be polygamy. We'll probably see that happen. We'll probably see a fight about what age someone truly can get married at, what that age of consent really is. I'm concerned with some of those factors. I would have hoped, if I had any say in this, I don't, but that we could have done a little bit better job of identifying what are the bounds of marriage. So that's the only thing I'm concerned about, but you have to have this in place unless you want your default to be Proposition 8.
Any comments on that? Some of those opposing Prop 3 have suggested some rather far out things like aunts marrying nephews and such. I really don't see that as a weakness in this.
No, absolutely not. It's no reason to say pause and then we go and then we start all over again. I think this is the best place to start, and I think down the road we should probably have some. This will eventually get to the court. So I just don't like judges making decisions for me. So
and the courts will even it out.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. We will now move to Proposition 4. This is another bond measure. It is primarily the duty of the state government to conserve natural resources and respond to the causes and effects of climate change. The state derives its money to perform such functions either from the state's general fund or from selling bonds. If Proposition 4 is approved, then the state will be able to borrow up to $10 billion through the issuance of bonds to fund conservation projects for a variety of things. About 40% of this money would be used to increase the amount and quality of water available to families and for flood control. The rest of the funding would be allocated to drought prevention, wildfire prevention, coastal resilience, extreme heat mitigation, biodiversity solutions, sustainable farms, park creation, outdoor access, and clean air programs. Alan, you are a yes vote on Proposition 4. What are your reasons?
We've probably all seen the effects of inadequate water, poor fire protection, all sorts of things that have suddenly erupted in our society. My daughter and her husband, he was the superintendent of the Big Creek School District, lost their home in the Big Creek fire. Now they have moved to Tennessee, and they are coming home from their current assignment in Beirut to see whether Hurricane Milton damaged their home in Tennessee. And here we hear of Porterville, who has a significant part of its population without safe drinking water. Other places have difficulty getting pure water and are suffering the health impact of poor water, poor drinking water, and the inadequacy of water in general. So it's definitely a need. It's another one of these things that we've got to plan for and to work to erase and to work to deal with to the extent that we can, and recognize that it's not just something that we can ignore each year. We're worried about fires again. And so every year we see fire insurance rates go up in the rural foothill communities. We've got to do something to help people understand and perhaps do a better job in fire control. I have heard that in the olden days when the Indians were running things in this state, that as they left the hills in the winter, knowing that it was going to snow and be a little unlivable up there, they would light a fire as they left and let the underbrush in that forest be consumed with fire, and that protected them the next year when they came, because all of the loose litter and the combustible materials had already been taken care of. Now, I don't think we can go back to that because we have too many developments there now, but we have to do the very best that we can to protect the people that live there, help them to do proper jobs in their own fire prevention and control. But it's the water portion of this that makes me know that there are people in California that are definitely suffering because they can't get pure drinking water and have to either ship it in, get bottled water brought in, or something like that. So I will vote yes on this.
All right. I'm going to go back to one of the main issues I have with most of the ballot initiatives at this point, and that is the fact that we'd be borrowing money at some of the highest interest rates in at least my recent history. I'm 42, 43 in a couple days, so I'm still pretty young, I guess, in that regard. But it's been a while since we've had to borrow money at this high of an interest rate. It borrows $10 billion. There is zero written down plans on how this money will be used. There's projects that I'm sure that have come down the pipeline, but there is nothing specifically been written out regarding how this money will be specifically used. Now, in addition to that, one thing that was brought up by Alan that certainly concerned me, because a fire that started more than a mile away from me ended up touching my house. And I mean, there's pool equipment on the north side of my house, melted all that. That got that close. So fire is a real issue, but there is no commitment whatsoever to address the failures in fire risk management. Now, this isn't necessarily just one, this doesn't just address one element of fire risk management. There's zero commitment to it. The other concerns that I have with it would be that the Prop 4 funds can ultimately go to climate change projects that not the legislators, those that we choose to represent us and make laws, but just the people in the Sacramento office that they deem that they want to see fit. Nothing that we have any say in whatsoever. So, and then lastly, I hate to bring it up again, but they do this on purpose. The money can be used to backfill budget deficits. There's no rule that makes it not possible to do that. So we like this, how this ballot sounds. We think it would ultimately serve our country in our world, and definitely our state and our local area very well, but unfortunately the money can be used for anything. And that's a problem that Sacramento's had. We hear how big our economy is, and then we still hear how we're in a deficit. We hear how high our taxes are, and we hear how we're still in a deficit. They have to find all these ways to backfill budget deficits, and this can be one, unfortunately.
All right, we will move to Proposition 5. This is another legislative constitutional amendment. Years ago, it was the rule that all local bond measures required a 2/3 vote to pass. The problem with this was with school bonds. They were starting to fail. A lot of them failed. And so the threshold for passing a school bond, a local school bond, was lowered to 55%, but all other bonds had to meet that 2/3 threshold. Well, everyone in this room knows that one of the major crises facing this state is the absence of affordable housing. And for a housing bond to pass, a local housing bond to pass, it would need to meet that 2/3 threshold, unless Proposition 5 is passed. If the voters approve Proposition 5, the threshold for bonds related to for affordable housing and for public infrastructure projects like water projects, fire protection, and even for roads will be lowered to 55%. This is likely to mean that more of these bond measures will pass. Alan, you are again a yes vote on Proposition 5. What is your reason?
We often talk about majority vote and that the majority rules. And we see what happens when supermajorities are required. We see Congress, for example, in a position where hardly anything gets through Congress anymore because their parties are split evenly enough so that the Senate particularly can't find the 60% to pass a bill. In California, we started out with a 2/3 requirement for any bond issue. I think it was because we sometimes felt that there was enough riffraff in the electorate, enough of the electorate that didn't really think through carefully what they voted on, and they voted sometimes for things that were unwise, and somehow were able to get their point of view over, even though it didn't turn out that the vote was appropriate. Well, we give our approval to a majority vote. I think that probably in order to get some motion in programs and efforts to do things in this country, we're going to be getting ourselves into a situation where it's going to be difficult to get 55, 60, 66 and 2/3% for anything. And that would completely lock the doors, close the programs, deal with issues strictly on an annual budget kind of an issue. This bond would only go for affordable housing, which we all know when we look out our windows and see where people are living and how they are living. We know that we are going to have to deal with that issue one way or another. And by adding the public housing to that 55% majority control, like the schools, that this would perhaps be a way to deal with the homeless population that we're having such concern about lately.
Joshua.
Okay, so I assume by now everyone's kind of gotten an understanding of how I feel about money being spent. And the plain English of this, because there have been multiple attempts, almost it seems like every ballot year there is an attempt to undo Prop 13, but this is yet another attempt to gut Prop 13. It makes it, and this is plain English, I wrote down here, plain English, makes it easier to raise taxes by lowering vote required on initiating new taxes from 2/3 to 55%. That's it right there. I never felt, taxes are absolutely needed. When we call 911, we expect the 911 call to be answered, and if we need fire for an ambulance, for a fire truck to show up, and or an ambulance if there's a health issue, or police if we need their assistance. When we flush our toilet, we don't care where it goes, we just want it to go somewhere and have it be away from us, right? That's what government takes care of, and our money pays for that stuff. Taxes were never meant to be easy to be thrown on us, or thrust upon us, or even forced upon us. It was never meant to be easy. And I think that's why Prop 13 was so popular when it passed, was that it made it very, very difficult for new taxes to be placed onto us as citizens. I want to be crystal clear, and I'm 100% sure about this. This will hurt the poor more than anybody else. Rich people, business owners, they have the ability to take their costs, if their taxes go up, and put them back on those beneath them. So, for example, I'm a business owner. If I face higher gas prices, I have to charge a little bit more to my clients in order to pay for those gas prices. I don't dip into my kids' piggy bank, although I'm not afraid to. I'm their dad. That's what I get for creating them. I'm not afraid to, but that's not what I do. I charge my clients more money. If this goes up, this is going to hurt the poor. Every time taxes go up, it slows down the economy for a short bit, and then what we do see is a rise in costs again. Now, for a very long time, politicians have sought to repeal Prop 13 because it makes it very difficult on them to balance a budget without it. But this unfair tax hike would ultimately hit the struggling residents. Prop 5 is another effort to chip away at Prop 13 protections and make it much easier for politicians to raise taxes. And Californians already face a cost of living crisis. And I just don't feel at this time we can afford this. Until we see our country get a little bit better control over the costs that we're facing right now through inflation, I just don't think we should be talking about new taxes at this point. We need to have a recovering economy, which we're not there yet. We've stabilized, but we're not recovering yet, and we need to get to that point before. And it's ultimately going to depend on who you vote for in November, but we're not talking about that tonight, right, Mr. Wall? So go ahead.
That's correct.
Okay.
All right, to recap, a yes vote on Proposition 5 would be to amend the state constitution to say that the threshold for local bonds for affordable housing or public infrastructure will be lowered from 2/3 to 55%. We will now move to Proposition 6. One of the last measures to pass through Congress when Abraham Lincoln was president was the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery and involuntary servitude except as punishment for crime. California Constitution is consistent with that. However, 34 states have already passed laws stating that involuntary servitude cannot be used as punishment for crime, which means that prisoners in their state prisons can't be forced to work. California is not one of those states. Currently in California, prisoners can be required to do jobs such as cooking or cleaning, or like at Folsom Prison, that's where your license plates are made. And the question before us is whether California should now be consistent with most of the other states and have a constitutional amendment that says prisoners cannot be forced to work. Alan, you are in agreement with Proposition 6. What are your reasons?
I don't even think that California has a definite problem in this regard, but we've all seen the movies, we've all heard the stories about such things as chain gangs and involuntary forcing of people to engage, because they're incarcerated in this kind of forced labor. We don't believe in slavery, even with prisoners, and that's basically what could be the case without this. Now, in California, there usually is a minimal payment that is made to people. It's not much. They barely can get their cigarettes and their soda and whatever else that they want to get to enjoy a little bit of life in prison. They're still locked up, but they are given the advantage of having educational opportunities. We hope that they're going to re-enter society in a productive manner. And we're certainly not teaching them how to be good citizens if we don't let them get some kind of recompense for the work that they do. So saying that it's no longer available by law to have involuntary servitude in the prisons, we're letting them have a little bit of a glimpse of what it would be like if they came out and got into the mainstream of the economic system that we have. So yeah, I think it's sensible, it's Christian, and it's my point of view that people should not be forced to work, but should be encouraged to work and be given the recompense that they deserve for doing that.
Okay, so I wrote down a plain English definition, and the plain English is that this removes requirement that criminals in prison have to do work details, allows prisoners to unionize, and demand pay hikes from taxpayers. Now, that's exactly what it is when you break it down. You'll find that in the incredibly large amount of verbiage that comes with this. Now, it's being sold, and I really feel like this is what's happening. It's not something that I feel should be very easy to vote for, but it's being sold as a ban on slavery and involuntary servitude, but it actually just eliminates the ability of state prisons to require criminals behind bars do work to earn their keep. Now, what it really is going on as well is taxpayers, this is in there as well, taxpayers will be forced to give pay raises to prisoners for doing tasks they should be doing themselves, and this includes cleaning their own cells, common areas, doing laundry, and making food. So for those that deserve to be in prison, there's a lot of people that are really, truly trying to turn around their lives, and I want to make sure I do my part, whatever that may be, to help them get their life back in order to do so. And I definitely have a heart for those that have repented, made their life right, and are trying to make a comeback. However, I feel while you're in prison, I shouldn't be forced as a taxpayer to pay for you to make your bed, to do your laundry, to make your food. I feel like that's an obligation that ultimately should fall on those that are in prison. So that's where I come from on that.
To summarize, a yes vote on Proposition 6 would amend the state's constitution to prevent jails and prisons from forcing incarcerated persons to perform work. We have now finished the 5 propositions that were placed on our ballot by the state legislature. We'll now turn to the initiatives. Proposition 32 deals with the minimum wage. Statewide, the California minimum wage is now $16 an hour. In certain industries, like fast food, it's higher. The minimum wage laws do not apply to independent contractors or to self-employed persons. The thrust of this proposal is to raise the minimum wage in California, and this is how it would work. Employers with 26 or more employees would have to start paying $17 an hour immediately, and on January 1st, they would have to pay $18 an hour. Employers with 25 or fewer employees would start paying $17 an hour on January 1st. On January 1st of the following year, 2026, that would then go up to $18 an hour. And after January 1st, 2027, the minimum wage would be adjusted for inflation. Alan and I are voting yes on this. Joshua's voting no. Alan, what are your reasons? I think I can guess.
I spent my whole career working with the poor and seeing them wanting to work, which is the case with most all of them. There are always exceptions to that, even among bankers and people that say that they're employed, but find all sorts of ways to laze on the job. I had to deal with so many people that said that welfare recipients were lazy and wouldn't work, which isn't true. But the one thing that I do know is that they can't live on what we currently call our minimum wage. If that's a one-family income situation, one parent or a wage earner in the family, we need to make sure that we don't force, which welfare does, people to look for work, but then when they find it, it doesn't meet their needs as a family, and they are left in the terrible position of abiding by the law that they should be wage earners and law-abiding citizens in all sorts of ways, but they can't afford to pay their rent, buy their groceries, do all of the other things. So every state has established what they consider to be the minimum wage that is appropriate. And I don't believe in any state in the union it meets the need for a family of, let's say, 4 for a father to be working and to earn enough to keep his family housed, well-fed, well-clothed, and comfortable. I don't think anyone in this room would want to live on $16 an hour. And that's what we currently say is the wage that a full-time worker can receive in working 40 hours a week. I know that I can afford to help people pay more than that, to receive more than that. And so I'm willing. As Josh says, some of these things are going to require increased taxes. I think there are people in our society, maybe not at the bottom 3 or 4 brackets in their income tax payments schedule, but in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, or higher ones, there are sufficient monies in this country that we can at least provide that a person working for their family can support them fully.
Joshua.
Thank you. I believe it or not, did struggle with this one quite a bit. When times get tough, I take a wage, for example, from my company when I was first getting out on business, and that wage was pretty similar to minimum wage. I didn't know how we were going to feed my wife and I, let alone the kid that we had on the way. But here's my concern right now. And I wrote down some notes, and kind of redid my thoughts as I began to think about this. I think I'm concerned with the amount of entry-level jobs that would be available at a minimum wage disappearing from the state of California. Every time minimum wage has jumped here in the state of California, there's been a chunk of jobs, however small, it can be 0.0001%, that have left the state to seek another state where they don't have to pay such a high entry-level amount. I think I'm concerned with those that are on welfare right now, not the ones that don't want to work. There's some, not all, not even close to all. The majority want to get back, and they treat welfare like the trampoline that it is. They just want to get back into the workforce. I want to make sure that we provide here in the state a workforce that they can join. They're going to need an entry-level job, and we're going to have a lot of employers that have plenty of these entry-level jobs that fingers crossed, they can graduate to make more and more and more. And there was a gentleman I know in Sanger, his name's Richard Luce. He started off stocking shelves at midnight, making minimum wage, whatever it was. I think he talked about it being $2.52 or something like that. He now makes well into the six figures as the vice president of something and something with Walmart. He's doing incredibly well, but he had that entry-level job to jump into. Now, Walmart was probably a terrible example because Walmart's not going anywhere. There'll be plenty of Walmarts that'll always offer these types of jobs, but maybe there'll be someone that wants to get into manufacturing that just doesn't feel the future belongs, for him and his family belongs with Walmart. I want to make sure we provide as many of those types of jobs as we possibly can. And right now, this is where I want to read from my notes. We're suffering with some of the highest inflation, and previous wage hikes have spiked up prices for those productions that they create, whether it be food or bike parts or what have you. It has spiked up those parts because, again, rich people, they don't dip into a piggy bank that belongs to their kid. They raise their costs, and that just creates a further inflation. So you see a short amount of time when minimum wage goes up and prices are still the same and you're making a lot of money, then all of a sudden everything begins to creep up again. And it just creates this awful inflation that I don't know how much more inflation we can afford to take on here in this country and especially the state. So that's why I'm against this at this point. I would love for them to make more money. I feel the free market has a little bit of a better way of providing that for workers. I don't pay minimum wage as a landscape contractor. I don't pay a single one of my guys minimum wage. And if I did, I wouldn't have any employees. The lowest paid employee I have right now is $23.52 an hour. That's what I have to pay right now to keep employees employed, and that's nowhere near the minimum wage. So sorry for the rambling. It's a struggle for me because I want them to make more money. But I still want there to be jobs for them those entry-level jobs for them to get into.
Okay, to recap, a yes vote on Prop 32 would change the state labor laws to raise the minimum wage to the levels shown on the slide. We'll now move to a very controversial subject, rent control. The Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act was passed in 1995 in response to certain local communities imposing very strict rent control laws. Under Costa-Hawkins, the landlord was allowed to set the initial rental rate for new tenants and for new construction and for single-family residences, and tenants were allowed to sublet. It is unmistakable that Costa-Hawkins has encouraged the construction of new housing. In 2019, Governor Newsom shepherded the Tenant Protection Act, which further protected tenants. Landlords can't increase rent more than 10% over a 12-month period. If a tenant has lived at a property for more than a year, the landlord must have a valid reason to evict that person. Nevertheless, some local governments have enacted laws to limit rent increases from year to year and how much a landlord can raise the rent. The Costa-Hawkins Act would be abolished if Proposition 33 passes. Local governments would then be allowed to impose stricter rent control and control rents for any form of housing, not just single family. And the state would be prohibited from regulating that. Alan, is a yes vote on this. Joshua and I are no votes. So, Alan, what are your reasons?
Rent is something that we have seen increase astronomically, even in the last couple of years. At the same time, we see all sorts of people that can no longer pay the rent that they're expected to pay out on the streets. That's a difficult problem, and we're finding it very, very difficult to figure out how to handle it and how to deal with it and what we can do to ameliorate the circumstances that cause housing to be so expensive and so many people with minimum wage as low as it is and other factors in society that they have no other alternative, even with income. And most homeless people have regular monthly income, which surprises many people. Many have state disability. Many of them have public assistance of some sort or another. Many of them have Social Security, pensions, whatever, but they still can't afford to pay the rent because it has gone up so rapidly. I know it's probably just a stretch to say, let's back off a bit and let's let local communities have the freedom to deal with their own population the way it would work best for them. But under the law now, they can't do that. This would, and it's a 23-word proposition, which I think is probably the low in all history. All it does is it allows cities and counties to determine whether or not they want to have their own system for rent control. I'm willing, because nothing else has worked with this homelessness, to say, let's give this a chance. And we've had this proposition on the ballot. This is the third time. 2 times already it's gone down. 2 times I've voted yes on it. And so I don't think that I want to back off on the position that I have always held, that if there's going to be rent increases, they should be reasonable, limited, and that a local community can best decide how it wants to deal with that, rather than establish something that's statewide and covers everywhere and every community. So I will vote yes on this.
I have to say, it sounds incredibly amazing to be able to help more of those that seek housing have the opportunity to do so by, for lack of a better adjective, I guess, force rents to be lowered. Now that sounds great. It really does. Now, here's the problem, though. If we had no examples of how this hurts those that seek housing, if we had no evidence that it actually hurts those that seek housing, I would say let's do this. But unfortunately, we've seen countries that have tried this and it fails. Venezuela is an example. They have nationwide controls on the costs of rent, and it failed. San Francisco and Los Angeles have some of the strictest rent controls in the nation. And how is housing going on in those 2 cities? It's some of the worst in our state. There are issues with the amount of housing out there, and there's issues with the amount of people that seek that housing. I know plenty of families that are 2 to 3 families per home. They have no other choice. I get this. Here's what happens, though, and I'm trying to put this in the plainest English as I possibly can. If we tell developers in the state of California, we are going to control what you're able to charge your tenants, you're going to have less developers come to the state to develop new housing structures. That's one side of it. Number 2, it's been shown that those that abide by the state law, not by the state laws, but by the rent control laws, they actually make more money because they're guaranteed certain raises no matter what at the time durations that are spelled out in those rent control laws. So that means every third year they can raise it up 15%, and every sixth year they can raise it up 20% or what have you. They're guaranteed those sums. That makes it even more difficult for more people to jump into a house because they're simply not able to keep up with those guaranteed raises that a landlord's able to get. As a landlord of a home I've struggled very hard to get people into rent. I've had to lower it in the past down to a sum I never thought was possible just to get them in. And I couldn't raise it because if I raised it, they would move out. At least I felt that way. I just don't think this is the solution to getting more people into homes. And I think this is actually going to turn out to be the opposite should it pass. This is why these things don't pass, is because there's so much evidence that it actually hurts those that seek it. I hope I've explained that. So,
Joshua, I heard you say that this would negatively affect developers coming into the state.
yes.
It will certainly affect developers right here in the state. In fact, it is clear that housing construction will be reduced if this passes, less incentive to develop, and that will mean affect jobs.
No matter how much we want to hate the rich people, and I don't mind hating them with you guys, okay? The fact of the matter is, in some circumstances, we need some rich people to get together, come to our state, and develop a project. If we talk about the economy and we have 3 shirts with 3 different people, we can't just hand our shirts to one another to clean and pay each other $2. There's no increase, right? And for our economy to survive, there has to be an increase. One of us has to charge $2.50, and that way we get a little bit of increase. We need private partnerships in this state to help build out developments, help build out apartment complexes or condominiums or suburban homes. We need them. But we're not telling them that we're on their side if we tell them what they're able to charge. We would like the economy to be able to tell them what they're able to charge, and then they can ultimately make a decision whether they feel like it's a good investment or not. Anyway, so, yeah.
Okay, to recap, a yes vote on Prop 33 would be to abolish Costa-Hawkins and to give wide latitude to local communities to establish rent control ordinances. We'll now move to Prop 34. This is a complicated and confusing initiative. I've had several people come up to me and say, what is 34 all about? If you've read your sample ballot, you probably had the same thought. There are 2 parts to it. Just to give you an overview of this, Prop 34 is on the ballot because this is a fight between 2 powerful interests. The California Apartment Association, which supports this measure, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, which opposes it. There is a federal program that allows discounts in drug pricing to certain nonprofit hospitals and clinics that provide services to low-income people. Using these discounts, the providers could acquire drugs more cheaply and then charge more to private health plans. And then in the interstice, they will get some money. And the amount of money they can realize for this is staggering. Over 10 years, I think the figure is something like $100 million. Now, under current law, these providers can use these discounts to expand services to low-income people. But they don't have to do that. They can spend that money earned from the discounts on other things, like political purposes. That's what the Apartment Association doesn't like. Now, that's one part of Proposition 34. It would change the law so that at least 98% of the revenues that these providers of healthcare receive from their discount to be used directly for patient care. Now, the other part of this initiative is completely separate from what I just said. Medi-Cal, as you probably know, is California's version of Medicaid. And in 2019, California Medi-Cal started using a new approach in acquiring pharmaceuticals. As a result of an executive order issued by Governor Newsom, this new approach is called Medi-Cal RX. It has saved the state money, but it's about to expire. So the other part of Proposition 34 is that it would authorize statewide negotiation of Medi-Cal drug prices and formalize what was created by the executive order by the governor. Joshua, you are a yes vote on 34. Alan and I are no votes. Why are you a yes vote?
No one thought I could say yes, that's why. Okay, so as Mr. Wall pointed out, this.
Jeff, please.
Okay, Mr. Jeff Wall. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation is the keystone to all this. This is true. They've received hundreds, and by the way, they do a tremendous job, okay? They've received hundreds of millions in taxpayer funds for programs through their government contracts, okay? Which they're legally allowed to seek after and they're legally allowed to receive right now. But the problem is that they've used, we don't have an exact figure on this, so certainly in the millions, to engage in ballot measure campaigns to advance their thoughts on what policies should be. Now, my thought process is, we have, for example, in the federal government, the Hatch Act, right? That prevents a politician from using his office to further his office, so to speak. I just don't feel like it's fair. I don't feel like it's morally correct for an institution as amazing as the AIDS Healthcare Foundation is to take taxpayer dollars from the richest of the rich all the way down to literally the poorest of the poorest, and to use that money to further what they feel is best for themselves. Now, they may say it's best for us, and it may be true, but ultimately, they're doing it for themselves. And what a yes vote does is it says, you can't do that any longer. You have to use the money that we give you for the direct-to-patient gain. You can't use it any longer on politics. We want businesses such as the AIDS Healthcare Foundation out of politics as much as possible. Let politicians do what they do in Sacramento. Let us vote on what needs to be voted on. And if we don't like what a politician's doing, we vote them out every couple of years. And if we like them, we keep them in. This is the problem with a lot of what goes on in the state is we have so much money flying around, we really don't pay attention to where it goes. $10, in my opinion, is too much for such an amazing organization to be using on politics. Let them stay out of this. Let them focus on taking care of the patients. Let's stop them right now as soon as possible on using that money for something else.
Alan, you're a no vote.
I had to ask myself, why would the AIDS Healthcare Foundation be interested in the one we just finished discussing, Prop 33? They have been the primary supporters of the rent control one that we finished talking about all 3 times that it's been appearing on the ballot. The only possible reason for that is that as people that have lived through the AIDS crisis, you probably can imagine what it does to an apartment house or what it has done in the past when a patient and his privacy has been violated to the extent that people now know that they're victims of AIDS. And it seems as if AIDS patients have been particularly targeted to have their rent increased to the limits that they can possibly pay or that they can charge because they're undesirables. And so the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, as part of their care for the health of their clients, is concerned about where are they going to live if they get kicked out because of a continual year-by-year increase in their rent payments. So that's the motivation for them to have done this for 3 years in a row. And the interesting thing about 34 is that it establishes the criteria for detecting the agencies that need to be corrected to the point where it is limited to one organization in the state. The only organization that this initiative would affect is the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. And that bothers me. And it's clear that the landlords are now trying to pay back the AIDS Foundation for having tried in the last 3 elections to get their clients properly recognized as having a rental problem. And that's part of the treatment of their condition, is to see that they have a suitable, healthy place to live. And so I just don't like vengeance as a motive for establishing an initiative that affects only one party, and that is because they do have an obligation to provide whatever assistance they can for those who are victims of AIDS. So I will vote no.
I mentioned in the intro there are 2 parts to this. The sort of lesser part is extending Medi-Cal RX, which was established by the governor. I'm actually in favor of that, but I don't think it's a reason to vote for the initiative. The legislature can extend Medi-Cal RX. All right, we will move to, I will say that a yes vote on 34 would be to restrict the usage of funds,
Taxpayer funds.
That go to the providers of these services and the discounts that they receive, so that 98% of the discount funds must be applied to patient care. We'll move to Proposition 35. Prop 35 deals with Medi-Cal funding. Presently, there is a tax, state tax, on certain managed care plans. This tax helps to defray California's cost for Medi-Cal. Currently, the state's paying about $35 billion a year for its share of Medi-Cal expenses. The federal government pays the other part. And this money comes from the general fund. This tax on managed care plans brings in approximately $2.5 billion to the state, and it helps to defray the Medi-Cal expenses. This tax, however, will sunset in the year 2026 unless it's renewed. Proposition 35 would extend this tax. Alan, you are a yes vote. What is your reasoning?
For many of my 34 years at the Department of Social Services, I administered and was the manager of the program that we call Medi-Cal. It has saved multiple lives. It is the one program that the state has established that does provide for the poor in our midst a measure of medical care. And it's worked. We really have achieved wonderful accomplishments in healthcare in California and throughout the nation because of Medicaid and Medi-Cal here. And so it's proven itself. Why should we let it sunset now that it has been proven to be so effective? Let's just continue it, and we can make it permanent if it looks like the state legislature finds in the future that that's unwise, or that someone raises another initiative that would terminate that. So be it. But why do we have to let people worry that something that has worked to save their lives and their children's lives and provide some measure of good health to them has a sunset date and could be ending? Let's let them know that we want to continue it and that we extend it permanently, which can always be changed in the same manner that this would establish it. So I will vote yes on the 35.
Joshua, why am I not surprised you're voting no on this?
All right. Now, something that was mentioned by Mr. Allen was that, if we like it, well, hopefully someone will bring this back in the future and then it'll become permanent. Well, this is that measure. This makes a permanent and imposes a permanent tax on healthcare. So this is that permanent vote that he was speaking of. Here's the thing I want to be crystal clear of. There's a lot of things that are we still need to do with our healthcare system here in California. I took a friend to the emergency room, and I would arguably say 90% of the people in this emergency room really didn't need to be in the emergency room. Now, emergency room for me is someone that is in dire need of health care, not because they have a cough that hasn't gone away in a couple days, or they have an ingrown toenail. And by the way, those two things were in the emergency room. There is a problem with their health care. It does require more funding. We need to provide better options that allow people to see doctors, maybe even walk-in clinics, and not feel like they're forced every time that they have a health element to go to an emergency room because they know that by law they need to be treated. Now, that's not this. It's just my claim that there's so much more we need to do with our healthcare system. I want to talk about some of the positives with this specific provision. There is an initiative to hold state politicians accountable for the spending of healthcare funds on healthcare and for ensuring that reimbursement rates to struggling healthcare providers are made more sustainable. And I want to be crystal clear. I really, really hope to see those good provisions in a future initiative that is presented to voters. Here's my concern is right now, this state forcing on everyone that has, that's part of an MCO, specifically a managed care organizations, that this Proposition 35 will permanently impose a tax on healthcare. It's just, we're taking money from one group of people, providing it for another, and that group of people we're taking it from aren't necessarily rich. And it's gonna hurt a lot of people. I hope we can find a better way of funding this incredibly needed program. I just don't think it revolves around a permanent tax on people. So that's where I come from.
A yes vote on Proposition 35 will extend and make permanent the tax that currently exists on managed healthcare plans. We will now turn to our last proposition for the evening, Proposition 36. This deals with sentencing. In our 2014 ballot forum, we discussed Proposition 47. 47, which passed handily, reduced some theft and drug crimes from felonies to misdemeanors, unless the defendants had certain priors for thefts. In the wake of Proposition 47 passing, the prison population went down 28%. The estimated savings to the state from this reduced prison population was about $95 million last year. It's not surprising, however, when I tell you that retail theft is up, and so are crimes related to trafficking in certain drugs like fentanyl. Proposition 36 has many parts. We don't have time for a detailed explanation. I will summarize. If this passes, the following will happen. If a defendant had 2 priors for theft or drugs, the misdemeanor charge can be increased to a felony. If the defendant pleads guilty to a felony drug possession charge and completes a treatment program, the charges can be dismissed. Courts will be required to give warnings to a convicted drug dealer that if they keep dealing drugs and someone they deal to dies, they can be charged with murder. Some felony convictions currently resulting in jail time that can be served in the county jail will be state prison from now on. And if 3 or more people are involved in a crime, extra years, if this passes, can be added to the sentence. Let's see. Joshua, you are a yes vote on Proposition 30.
There's a couple of them out there. You're going to have to forgive me. I'm going to have to stand up, guys. I've had a very long day today.
These are not comfortable.
I started off in Mexicali, Mexico this morning, left about, and I know it seems funny, it's true. I left at 10 o'clock, 10, 11 o'clock, right around there.
You texted me at 9:30.
So 9:30, I was about ready to cross the border, okay? And of course, 7 white gringos in a van, and a gringa wife and myself, we looked a little bit suspicious. So they went through the van, didn't find anything, I promise. And then we were on our way finally. And I've been sitting down all day, so I am going to stand up finally. But speaking of Mexicali, I wanted to point out something. While in Mexicali, I asked a pharmacist who I had a relationship with because he had introduced me to a doctor I was seeing down there. And I asked him, is fentanyl really an issue for Mexicali? He says, follow me. Took me across the street where they were at Pinata store, and he says, follow me. And I went through the store, went to the back where they were making fentanyl pills, the counterfeit ones, but with the fentanyl ingredients in them. And the way they would make them is they would pour 3 ingredients into a blender. It was in fact a Ninja blender, the ones you get at Walmart. I have a Ninja blender. They would throw all the ingredients into this Ninja blender. They would mix it up, and then they had this almost like a cookie sheet, but with a bunch of little holes in it. And they would sprinkle these ingredients into those little holes, and then they would press them, and it would form that blue pill, as everyone calls them, they're blues. That's the street name for them. And that's how they're made. How much consistency you think comes from making a pill as deadly as fentanyl by way of a Ninja blender? And the answer is 0. There's no consistency. Any initiative you bring in front of me that has an increased penalty for fentanyl trafficking, you can bet I'm going to vote for. But there's some other reasons why I'm a yes. You ask nearly every sheriff in the state of California, every DA, and nearly every member of every association that represents district attorneys, and they will say they are for Proposition 36. Now, I don't know much about, let's go out with welding, for example, but I know a welder, and I'll ask him, what are my options with this and this and this? And he'll tell me you can do X, Y, and Z. If I have a question that's medically related, I'll go to the doctor that has that opinion. Right now, we have an opinion on the need for Proposition 36, and the pros are your DAs and your sheriffs, and they're all in favor of this. Now, this, you may think, okay, well, all we're doing is we're going to put more hurt on the criminals, and some of those criminals are good people. They've just been born in tough situations. That's not justice. Well, the fact of the matter is, justice still resides with the DA's office. They still have the choice to bring all charges or one charge, but what Proposition 47 had done is it handcuffed them, preventing them to truly use the law, and whether it be the disciplinary form of the law, onto people that were bringing crime into our streets. The fact of the matter is, we have seen an increase in crime, petty crimes, and there's been a truly wave, both property and violent crime, and it has spiked ever since Proposition 47 was put in place. You can see, I didn't bring it with me, but you can see a very increased, noticeable spike. There's different spikes. When the economy starts to struggle, you'll see a little spike. Right? As soon as Proposition 47 was put in place, within months of it being in effect, you saw a jump. And then a further jump after those people were released from prison earlier than they should have been. When we handcuff our DAs and prevent them from truly being able to enable justice, I just don't think that's a good answer. We want our DAs to have the full constraint of the law, not be constrained by something like 47, and then be able to administer justice as they see fit. If there's a kid who was struggling at home, maybe he was a victim of molestation, and that's why he acted out, we want our DA to be able to take that into account with justice. That's what they're able to do. But 47, what it did is it further handcuffed them against what they were able to do. And unfortunately, we had an increase in crime as a result. So this restores a little bit, and ultimately, I really like the increased penalties for fentanyl.
Alan.
This is a tough one. If I was comfortable with this proposition, because I believed that prison helps people, then I'd probably support it. It would increase the mandatory punishment for some possession people that I'm not sure prison is the place where they need to be. Josh has talked all night tonight on finding better alternatives than what the proposition provides, and I think that I agree with those arguments for this one too. Proposition 47 really hasn't had enough time to prove its effectiveness, but you hear everyone saying that the crime rate has increased, and you read in the paper every day that it has been decreasing, that the number of murders, for example, is less. There seems to be something that we could use that, how many $1 million that is saved because the prisons don't have as many people in them as they did before. How many?
95. I think it said 95 million. Last year, just 95.
There has to be a better alternative than prison. Prison, I guess we have to admit, is the right place for certain people to be. But when you get into the issues of poverty, drug, lack of opportunity, and all the other things that go with it, we should have been saving up those savings and using them to find some appropriate kind of treatment program for drug offenders. And I'm going to vote no on it just because I want to see something other than prison offered as a solution to the drug problems that we've got. I guess because temporarily that's all that people are willing to put money into is prisons, and yet they're saving money at the same time by having less people in them. It just doesn't make any sense for me to continue a system, go back to a system that didn't work, first of all, and then to find one that did cause some major changes in the justice system that seemed to be directed toward helping people that have correctable or disorders, let's say. And I would just like to see a better alternative than 36, just a return to the old system as a way of solving the drug problems, because it didn't solve them then either.
To recap, if Proposition 36 passes, if you vote yes for that, these are the changes in existing law. We will now move to the last part of our program. We've always been interested in the past to see how the League of Women Voters is voting on these, what their recommended votes are for these initiatives. The California Republican Party and the California Democratic Party. Might take a moment to consider that chart. Also, I just received an announcement on my watch. The Dodgers defeated the Mets 10-5. I know some of you are interested in that. And now we are able to take some questions from the floor directed to any of our panelists. There's a microphone in back that Brian can hand to anyone who has a question. Questions? Yes.
This is relative to Prop 32. Do we know, does anybody know what welfare rate per hour is? So we've compared people who are on welfare having to get a job that pays minimum wage, which doesn't cover the cost of living. Does welfare cover the cost of living?
I've been out of the welfare program since 2000, so I'm living on memories of the ancient past in that regard. But I know that since then, and I was part of the process of developing the GAIN program, which has been replaced now by the CalWorks program, which only allows any adult 5 years of welfare assistance eligibility. So if they're given 5 years for their needs to be included in the welfare grant for a family. Children, of course, continue to be eligible unless they are the child born while the mother was on welfare. That child isn't entitled to any public assistance in terms of cash. So, and the amounts are not sufficient. I haven't kept up with the payment schedule since I left, but it obviously left people below the poverty level. It seems like it would be a suitable thing for a society to decide that people should at least live at the level that we consider the breaking point between poverty and non-poverty. And however they would work that out, but I don't know, Roger, what the amounts are currently.
My only comment would be this. I remember I had an employee that he had been doing a fantastic job, showed up early, left late, did a great job during the day, and we went to give him a raise. It was a $3.50 raise, if I recall correctly. It was a pretty good raise. He came back to me the next day and asked if it could be $2.25. What are you talking about? And he said, well, the problem is if you bring me up this amount, my daughter no longer qualifies for financial aid at college, and my wife doesn't qualify for, what is it called? WIC, that is exactly, Women, Infant, Child Care, right? Okay. Women, Infant, Child, excuse me. And all these different programs he starts spelling off, and I couldn't believe he was on all these programs. That's an issue that, I do know that typically when there's a minimum wage hike, that the other programs follow suit with it, so they create new low levels of what qualifies and doesn't qualify. But anyway, I don't have those statistics in front of me.
Other questions?
I haven't done the numbers here, but I guess the question is like when you're talking about minimum wage, does $17 or $18 an hour make a significant difference for people compared to the $16 per hour? I mean, I know every little bit helps, but I'm just asking, in terms of minimum wage, what is actually a livable minimum wage, what you're talking about? Is it these numbers?
I can tell you it's a lot different here than it is San Francisco. It's a lot different here than it is in Los Angeles. It's a tough balancing act, right?
When I started it, this is really in primeval times. I started working in '66 in public assistance, and I was a line worker at that point, and there was established by the state what was known as the MBSAC, the Minimum Basic Standard of Adequate Care. And that varied from county to county because counties have different levels of what it costs to have housing, what it costs to buy things. And so there was a very careful process of determining based on house composition in terms of how many parents, how many children, what the ages of the children were some of them in infants, were some of them in high school. All of those things went into a formula that determined how much that family received. Any income that they earned, then a certain percentage of that was deducted from their welfare grant. They tried to give enough percentage left out of the wages so that it was to the advantage of the family to work and receive public assistance at the same time. But I'm not sure how that balance has been maintained since I left, and I've been gone an awful long time.
Other questions? If not, this will conclude the 21st Biennial Willow Avenue Mennonite Church Ballot Forum. Thank you for coming this evening. Hope you enjoyed the program.
What time do you get?